Hey there, I'm Eli Straw, a mental performance coach who works with athletes of all different ages, from youth athletes all the way to college and professional athletes. Now, a question that I get asked a lot from the parents of the athletes that I work with is how can they, as parents, help with this process, right? Help their kids along their athletic journey, help their, young adults, whether they're college players, high school players, help them, approach games in the right way and just generally have a good mindset when they play. So what I wanted to do with this episode is just go through a few different tips that I give to the parents of the athletes that I work with to help you as a parent guide your kid along their athletic journey. And the first place that I want to focus is the way that you're talking to them and the goals that you and them are setting going into games. So an idea that I talk about a lot with players is this idea of setting outcome-based goals versus process or more controllable goals. One of the reasons that I tend to steer clear of outcome-based goals. Now, nothing that I do is completely cut and dry, right? So there are certain players that we will set outcome goals for, and I'll talk about that here in a second. But mainly, we're going to set more process, controllable, focused goals. A couple reasons for that is that when we set too outcome-based of goals, this can lead to more pressure, more fear, and more anxiety about not reaching those goals. And this is really difficult because, you as the parent, you're probably wanting to encourage them to go out there and score 20 points, or get a couple hits as a way to build their confidence, right? As a way to make them feel like they can achieve those results. And that's wonderful, right? That's a wonderful way to be encouraging them to believe in themselves. Unfortunately, a lot of times, especially if your athlete tends to be more of an anxious or a fearful player, these outcome-based goals, they turn into avoidance goals. So, for example, if I'm if I'm a baseball player and I'm going into a game and I think that the goals that me and my parents set where I need to get a couple hits today. Well, then I might start to think, well, what if I don't get those hits, right? Oh man, they're going to be really disappointed in me. Okay, then my stats are going to drop. So because they're focused so much on the result, we see this fear and this worry and this pressure and start to form because of those outcome-based expectations. So something that you can do with them is to help them identify what are the outcomes that they want to set or the outcomes they want to achieve, and then try to reverse engineer those and really get specific on the controllable goals they need to have going into a game. So for example, going back to the baseball player example, instead of thinking I want to get 2 hits during the game, maybe it's I want to get 2 hits, so what do I need to do to put myself in a position to do so? Well, I need to make sure that I have good at-bats. All right, so then what are some controllable goals you can focus on for those at-bats? Well, in the on-deck circle, I need to make sure I'm timing up the pitcher, and then I need to make sure that I'm aggressive at the plate. So then you could talk to them as their parent about how their number one goals for the game need to be timing up the pitcher on deck and then being aggressive at the plate. So we want to start setting more controllable goals for games. And this is really going to help if your athlete experiences high expectations. Either they feel them from you, they put the expectations on themselves, or they feel them from their coaches. But we need to make sure that we are approaching games focused on the controllables. Now, this is going to do a couple things. One, like I was saying with the anxiety and the fear, it's going to help reduce anxiety and fear because we're focused more on what we as the athlete can actually do and control going into the game. But it's also going to help with confidence too, right? Because confidence is built on seeing yourself do well, seeing yourself have success. And when you achieve, or when an athlete achieves these controllable goals, over time, that will help them believe in themselves more because they're seeing themselves succeed at the goals and the targets they set during games. And something that I talk to a lot of players about is how unfair it is to set outcome-based goals for themselves because they're not fully within their control, right? They're great motivators, and that's that's when I have athletes set outcome-based goals. It's as motivation because I've found some players, they need that outcome-based goal in order to force them to give the effort that they need to give, which is the controllable type of goal and part of the process, right? But they need that as this target or this motivator. So this is one where you could talk to your athlete about, how do they tend to think about outcomes during games? Do they find that when they think about the result they want to achieve, it motivates them to play harder? And if that's the case, maybe you all want to set outcome-based goals, but remind them that in order to achieve those outcomes, they have to focus on the process and what they can control and do that to the best of their abilities. But if your player, tends to get more anxious or fearful and says that when I think about the outcomes I want to achieve, I worry about not achieving them. then I would encourage you to help guide their attention more onto the process of their game and what's in their control. And the great thing about all this is when they focus on what's in their control, they'll end up playing better because the results are just made up of all those controllable and process elements of their game. So that's one of the first places that I would look, if I was you as the parent wanting to help your athlete with their mental game, is work on reframing the outcome goals to more controllable process goals going into games. Now, the second place that we want to look is how you are talking to your athlete after games. So after games, do you tend to focus on what they didn't do well? Do you tend to focus primarily on their stats? If they're having a tough time managing mistakes, if they're having a tough time managing worry or fear about making mistakes, it's really important that we are having a good conversation after games and helping guide them to see mistakes as ways to learn, but also helping them focus on the positives of their game. Because no matter the age of the athlete, it's natural to hyperfixate on mistakes rather than focusing on the positives. But as I was saying earlier, if we want to build confidence, we have to succeed, right? We have to see ourselves succeed. And so if I'm going to start setting more controllable goals for games, after games, I have to focus on whether or not I did those controllable goals, and I have to feel good about the success I have when it comes to sticking to those goals that I set for myself. But I also want to make sure that I am learning from any mistakes that I made and not criticizing myself. So one of the best recommendations that I have for you as the parent of an athlete is that after games, you want to help guide your athlete through a solid self-evaluation process. And this is where you'll ask them questions like, all right, well, what were some positives from today's performance? Let's say you're on the car ride home. What were some good things about today's game? And help them list them out. And when they're thinking about the positives, don't overlook the mental side. If they went, 0 for 10 with their shots, but they were a great teammate, that's a positive. If they went 0 for 10 with their shots, but they were able to move on quickly and they kept shooting, again, that's a positive. So help guide them to focus on the positives by asking them these questions. And if you have an older athlete, you can do the same thing, whether it's on a phone call or through a text message. Help them focus on the positives. And, I would really encourage you as the parent, just because this is something that I've seen in a lot of the players I work with, to not try to criticize your athlete when it comes to the mistakes they made, but help them see the mistakes they made and ask them how they could learn from them and help guide them to this learning process, which kind of ties into the next tip that I'm gonna share, but help them see anything that didn't go the way they wanted it to from more of a learning and improving standpoint. Now, this goes back to what I was saying about how we want to focus on controllables going into games. We also want to focus on what's in our control as athletes after games and just in terms of our performance, in terms of our games in general. We need to be focused primarily on what is within our control. So after games, when you are going through this evaluation process with them, after they focus on the positives, ask them what can they learn or what can they work on from today's game. If they're really criticizing the fact that the official made bad calls and they're blaming the official, try to guide them onto what they can control and maybe what they could do differently next time based on what was happening. I had a conversation with a young pitcher just last week, and we were talking about how he was throwing what he considered to be strikes, but the umpire was just calling ball after ball after ball, and he got frustrated, which then caused him to lose his command. There was the very real fact that the umpire was bad or unfair, especially in his eyes, but I talked to him about how in those moments he has to work really hard to focus on what he can control about the situation. So then we got to the idea of, well, what he could work on next time is resetting himself and just focusing primarily on hitting his target no matter what the umpire was calling, because that was out of his control. So to help your athlete identify what they can work on, again, it's just simply by asking them the question of, what can you work on? How can you improve based on today's game? And make sure that they're doing so, again, focused primarily on what's in their control. So the first tip is make sure that you're helping your athlete have solid, controllable goals going into games. And then after games, you want to really pay attention to the way that they're talking to themselves, the way you're talking to themselves about the game, and try to go through this evaluation process where we're wanting to build confidence by focusing on the positives, and then we're also wanting to learn by trying to evaluate and learn from any sort of mistakes or anything that didn't go their way during the game. Now, these next two tips that I have for you aren't specifically about how you're approaching the game or how you're finishing the game. Those were done with the first two tips. These next two tips are really about the athlete's overall mentality and approach to the game. So the next tip that I have for you is, as the parent, you want to work on helping your athlete develop a continual improvement approach, which really just means that you want to discourage any perfectionist thinking where they feel like on any given day they have to perform perfectly and that they have to be the best they can be today. Now, I know that sounds weird, right? Because everybody wants their kids, and I want every player that I work with to perform their best every day, right? And be the best that they can be every day. But it's this mindset shift of, instead of feeling like I have to be perfect today and I have to be the best, which means make no mistakes today, I want to give it my best today, right? I want to give full effort. I want to do all the little things I can to the best of my abilities. But I know that I'm just improving today, just like I'm going to improve tomorrow and the next day and the next day. And when athletes can develop this improvement mindset, or this improving mindset, this really works against fear. It really works against anxiety. It works against being too critical of themselves, which causes a loss of composure during games. And they begin to adopt this mentality of, yes, I'm going to go out there and perform my very best today and give it my all, but I don't have to be the best version of myself today in terms of being perfect with everything that I do. Because number one, that's putting way too high of expectations on themselves. But then again, it also causes them to slip into this outcome-focused thinking, which drives more fear and anxiety and can unfortunately lead to more timid and hesitant play. So the way that you can help your athlete develop this improving mindset is, again, going through the evaluation process that I was mentioning earlier. It's also about helping them identify those controllable goals, which I mentioned in the first tip. But in general, it has to do with the way you're talking to themselves, or the way they're talking to themselves, and the way you're talking to them as the parent. And this is where you just want to keep talking to them about how they can always get better, how they can keep improving this, improving that, and try to really minimize the criticism that they're not good enough today, or that, your swing didn't look the best today. Try to talk to them in the way where you're saying things like, how can you improve your swing? What needs to be worked on with your swing? What are we going to do this week to get better with your shooting? How are you going to get better at your quickness on your feet? How are you going to improve your skating this week? So it really has to do with the way you're talking to them to help them see that every part of their game can be improved, and they're on this really long journey where they're just trying to get better day by day instead of feeling like they have to be perfect today. Now, the reason that I see that as so important is because if I were to pick out one mental skill that I have seen through all the hundreds of athletes that I've worked with be the main skill that will either help or hurt an athlete's performance, it's the way they talk to themselves, right? We can call this self-talk, we can call it internal dialogue, we can just say it's their thinking. But when an athlete has more fearful thinking, self-critical thinking, thinking focused on what other people think, right? When they have what we would classify as unhelpful thinking, their performances inevitably go down. They're not able to have consistent performances. We see their confidence drop. But alternatively, when they have better thinking, helpful thinking, confident thinking, they're able to have more process-focused thinking, their performances improve. And now it's not a magic pill where they all of a sudden think positively and they perform better, but it is one that gives them a much better chance of performing well. So the last tip, I said that you want to talk to them and you want to be careful the way you're talking to them to help them see their performance as something they always want to improve. And the reason I think that is vital is because as a parent, the way you talk to your athlete, in the words you use and the tone you use, that's likely going to be the way they start talking to themselves. So the last tip that I have for you is you really want to help your athlete understand the connection and the relationship between their thinking and their performance, and help guide them along just kind of this journey of developing a more positive and encouraging internal dialogue. You can do this, like I said, by paying attention to the way you talk to your athlete. But you can also do this by, having conversations with your athlete about how when they're negative, when they think poorly about themselves, when they're thinking worrisome thoughts, how does that impact their play? When they're so stressed and thinking about, what's coach going to think of me, or how will I play? Do they tend to play very aggressively and freely? Or do they play scared and hold themselves back? When they're thinking positively, they're they're getting ready to play the game, go out on the ice, go onto the field, and they're thinking things like, "All right, I've got this today. I know I can play hard. I'm gonna give it my all today. I've been practicing really well. I trust in myself." Do they tend to play more scared, or do they tend to play better? When you're able to have those conversations with your athlete about the relationship between their thinking and their performance, they're going to develop a better awareness of this relationship. And then they're going to start working to have more of this positive style of thinking. Because, like I said, I think that is the foundation of any strong mental game. It's the athlete being able to manage and control the way they think and have more helpful thinking instead of negative thinking. And the way we think, it's really just all about habits and patterns, and we learn that from the people around us. And so as their parent, you have a great opportunity to help develop this more positive and confident way of thinking in them. So the main 4 tips that I have for you, and again, there are a ton more, but I think these are 4 really good tips to begin with. The first one is to help your athlete develop more controllable process-based goals instead of outcome-based goals going into games. After games, help them go through this evaluation process where they're working to build confidence, but also seeing their mistakes as ways to improve. And then work on helping them to develop more of this improving mindset. And then lastly, help them understand the relationship between their thinking and their performance, and help them develop more confident and positive thinking. Now, as I mentioned earlier, I do offer one-on-one coaching where I work with athletes of all ages. So if you are interested in having me work directly with your young athlete or with your older athlete on improving their mental game, I've put a link to that in the description below for you to learn more. And if you have any questions about anything I included in this video, please put your questions in the comments below. I'll be happy to answer them in the comments, or if you would like me to go into more detail on any of the ideas I talked about, or just any idea when it comes to your athlete's mental game, leave those in the comments as well, and I'll make a new video or an episode on them in the future. Thank you for watching, thank you for listening, and I wish you the best of success in all that you do.